Yeah, so the question was, you know, should we be integrating different genres into lower levels that students might encounter in upper levels? Is that?
Yeah, and how to make transitions.
And vice versa, right? Yeah.
Spanish 104 to Spanish 203 or 200 level class, and now they're expected to write analytically, but
right.
I have no idea why they're doing that.
Yeah, so the idea, I mean, the whole sort of framing idea of that motivates this approach is that there shouldn't really have to be this transition, like this idea of the bridge course, right, that moves students from lower level language learning to upper level content learning, because in this approach, you're merging language and content all the way across. And so you're gradually introducing more genres as you go. At the same time, even if you're not doing literary analysis in 101, you're still introducing concepts related to that and sort of introducing students to these ideas as they go and recycling them and building on them, as opposed to just doing sort of informational, functional language type tasks in lower levels and then throwing them into the more analytical or creative stuff at upper levels. So to give you an example, in our second semester French curriculum, we have two multiliteracies based lessons that we've mapped onto our regular textbook. And in one of them, students do essentially what the exercice de style is. They read a cultural vignette by Philippe Delerme about sitting on a terrace in a cafe. They analyze the text, and then they do a creative writing activity where they write a very similar text about something that's important in their culture. And then the other project that they do is they watch a segment of Amélie, the movie, and then they have to do, it's this, I don't know if you know the film, but there's the scene where Amélie melts in the cafe because she sees the guy she loves and she can't talk to him. So students have to write a story continuation based on that. So they do two creative, well, I mean, story continuation, I guess you could count that as creative writing, but this is at the second semester level. So they're already doing that. And the idea is, as we develop our curriculum, we'll develop more of those kinds of writing tasks that will help move students more easily through the program. Yeah. Anything else?
I was wondering about if you're introducing these, we had a slide at some point that has the overlapping of reading and writing. It should all happen, not necessarily some things outside the classroom, some things inside, but that they would all happen all the time. Maybe, of course, we all know that the minutes that are devoted to language classes are slipping away.
Right.
So what sort of writing tasks do you have in that, for instance, second semester French course that you're devoting class time to instead of, say, speaking or listening or something that you go? Yeah,
so do you want me to repeat the question? Yeah. So the question is, where do you make time for all of this, right, in the classroom? How do you make time for reading and writing in class when we have so many other things to worry about? And we cut stuff. This is related to the conversation I was having with Dolly earlier today. We had these little cultural vignettes, often written in English, but sometimes in French, depending on which semester, in the textbook that just often don't integrate well with the rest of the textbook. So we cut those. They're called véhiculture. I'm sure you have them in your introductory textbooks. And you often think, oh, I wish I could just get rid of it. So we cut those. We also cut the skill using activities. So each module in our textbook has skill using activities at the end, and we cut all of those and used instead the activities that the instructors had created, and we wrote it right into the syllabus. But you know, there are different, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that if you're focusing on reading and writing as a way to develop language competencies, it's okay if you spend less time on teaching grammar and vocabulary. Because doing reading and writing is teaching grammar and vocabulary. Right? I tell this to my instructors all the time. So, there are studies that show that spending less time on teaching grammar and more time on teaching texts does not compromise students' linguistic development. That, in fact, they perform just as well as students who only focus on communicatively oriented grammar study on departmental tests that focus on language. I can give you the citation if you want it, but it's really true. So this text-based focus doesn't compromise language development in any way. So it's okay to cut back a little bit on some of the language, discrete point focus, and devote time to this. The other thing you can do is work in days in the syllabus that are devoted to writing. We talked about this when we had lunch. You know, having a writing workshop day, maybe twice during the semester, to do in-class writing. That's another option.
As well as reading.
Sure, why not? Yeah.
I was just curious if you're, you talked about how your older students were resistant to this, but I would say also that our younger students are very resistant to reading and writing and have this, they really want to be taught vocabulary in class. They want you to flash up the picture and then tell them the words that they have in their book. So what I thought was a really genius innovation or idea is to have the reflective part where the students actually have to admit that it's working for them.
Right.
So what I'm wondering about that genius part is that on a public wiki or blog so that other students can also see?
No, it was private. It was part of their grade, and I felt that it needed to stay private for them. So I was the only one who responded to it, and I didn't respond to any of the grammar. I only responded to the content. And that way, students didn't feel threatened in any way. They could basically say whatever they wanted. Some said very little, some said a lot. There were no parameters on how much they could write. But no, I didn't make it public. And remember, this is a class for majors, so I have a very captive audience. I think it would be different if I were doing this in a one-on-one class, right? In terms of...
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
I think that having them reflect upon what does work for them can make them admit their own success and their own...
Yes, and that's something that can also be brought into the classroom, right? Students can talk about that in small groups and share strategies. And that, I know some of my instructors have actually been doing that because they've been having trouble with student motivation. They're not preparing for class and all this and that. And so having them talk about strategies that are successful or unsuccessful with the class seems to empower them because they get tips from somebody else. Like, ooh, I'm going to try that at home, right? So it can be brought into the classroom too. Yeah.
Third semester of language learning, we strictly read the German fairy tales the entire course, and we would then, I developed summarizing activities or change it, but it was reading simply in simple past. Their simple past skills skyrocketed, but even though I kept forcing them to change it into other past tense or speak about it or change it to the present, those skills seem to drop.
They got bored?
I think the reading of just the one kind of grammar. So I think it's a wonderful approach, but I think in that class we needed other genres, other types of grammar. Fairy tales have this one grammar.
Right. Yeah, so the question is, can you go too far and just kind of go nuts on one genre? And I think the answer is yes, right? And I mean, people who espouse the multiliteracies approach would say that's actually detrimental because students don't get the opportunity of making genre comparison and seeing how language and conventions function differently within different text types. And that's the kind of thing that really pushes them to advance in their language development, right?
The idea was to use something like this.
Right.
But then I think you're
Right. Well, and the thing is with fairy tales, I mean, that's fertile ground. There's all kinds of related texts. I mean, if you think about Disney cartoons, so many of them are grounded in concepts related to fairy tales, so you could bring that genre in, or you could bring in secondary texts where people, you know, write about fairy tales, or, you know, there's modern fairy tales that you can read, or you can compare fairy tales from one culture to another. I mean, there's so many different things that you could do to create variety in that, to get away from what you're talking about and to really enrich the language learning experience for learners, yeah.
I think everybody's looking for the refreshment. Sorry. Sorry, it's time. Please propose your questions to Professor Paesani.
Oh, and I have my email up here too, so.
I think you'll have time while you have this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.